Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the Values Jam guest session series. And Pam, it's brilliant to have you here today. So to start with, could you introduce yourself and the great work that you do?
Thank you. I'm really excited about this conversation today, Alan. My name is Pam Simmons. I'm a consultant in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I primarily work in the area of fundraising for organizations. I think I've worked with every sector, from arts to education to social services. I've been in the field for about 35 plus years, so I think I know what I'm doing. But I also am a Barrett Value Center consultant. I don't do a lot of work in that area with Barrett's model, with Barrett's tools, but I use it in all my work, from strategic planning or future planning to how I help organizations develop their fund development plan or their capital campaign. So that's essentially what I do.
Okay. And just before we were talking, I was fascinated to hear you talk about exactly how you use values in your work with fundraising. So could you just in a few seconds explain what that looks like?
Sure. Okay. I should have mentioned I have a company called CoreNICHE, and that really came from my core values, actually. And I did that when I was working in the Middle East, in actually Abu Dhabi, and I really believe that if you have core principles and core values, then you can be really honest in how you do your work. And niche is sort of, I have a niche market where I have expertise actually in fund development, volunteer management, and also public relations, but I'm more focusing on fundraising. So the way I use values in my work is I am doing a lot of fund development plans, which is creating a diversified plan for charities. And I work with some smaller ones and medium-sized ones. And the first thing I need to do is know if they have a strategic plan or a future plan, so that you can base your fund development plan on what they're planning on doing. Many of them do not have one, or it's really outdated. So I find that I'm taking them through the whole strategic planning process. And the way I use it now is we base their strategic priorities based on their values. What are you doing to move your values forward in the organization with the projects or the activities that you're planning on doing? And are you raising money for those values? And I work with the boards primarily and the staff, and I find that they get really engaged when they can talk about the organization's values. And I really have had very little difficulty in getting them to volunteer on the fund development committee, which most people are afraid to do because they think they have to do cold calls. But it really works to lead and plan your organization based on what your core values are. You can't go wrong with that. So I use that in probably every single project I work on now. And also when I'm working with donors, if I know what their core values are, then you can speak to them in the right way. You can align your values of your organization that you may be working for with those of the foundations or the individuals. So it's really a win-win when you use values as a beacon.
Yeah. I mean, it constantly amazes me that it is so simple and yet so powerful. It's not often that you come across those two together in the same way as values are. So here's the Values Jam card deck. And what I'm going to do is tip out some of the cards, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me how many piles you'd like me to put in front of me, Pam.
4 piles.
Okay. And they're different sizes. And now from my left to my right, numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which pile would you like?
I'd like pile 1 and the 8th card.
Well, if I tell you
Birthday
that,
is on my birthday is on June the 18th, so I like the number 18.
well, I'm going to spoil this for you now because there's only 4 cards in pile 1.
Okay, then take the next 4 cards off the second pile.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the card that you've chosen.
Fulfillment. Oh,
Cool.
interesting.
So, first question. What does fulfillment mean? And what does it look, sound, and feel like?
Wow. I think when you're fulfilled, you are at peace with yourself and the world around you. That's how I imagine it. You are doing the work that you value. You are making a difference in the community. You are learning new things. You are eager to wake up in the morning and try something new. Those are some of the things that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, and I like the word peace. The word content came to me when, so I think, when you're fulfilled, and I think sense of peace is much better actually. You just feel like this is good, but it's not that kind of joyful shouting about it sort of thing. It's quieter than that. And then the other thing that is a little bit different to what you were saying is that it came to me that when you're fulfilled, it's for you and that's enough, rather than it having to be other people saying you've done a brilliant job and all of this sort of thing. Okay, and so from a metaphor point of view, what images come to mind when you think of fulfilled, or what sounds come to mind, or what feelings come to mind?
Well, I built a butterfly garden this spring, and just seeing it grow. I mean, this is a very simple fulfillment, but just seeing it grow and the butterflies are starting to come. They're not, it's not hordes of them because it's a young garden, but just seeing it take shape and know that you've done that project, and looking back at it every day, I go out and I look at it and I'm quite happy with what it looks like. That's one sense of fulfillment.
Yeah.
I suppose that I think fulfillment sometimes is fleeting. It's you can be fulfilled, but then you want to maybe stretch that fulfillment to a bigger perspective. So, and I'll use the analogy of the garden because I love gardening. And so you see other areas that you could expand and make beautiful, and you can look at it and feel, okay, that was a great project. Take it over to my work. I would say that fulfillment is probably a wonderful meal. I know I said work, but I want to talk about food for a moment, because fulfillment is also just having a wonderful group of people around the table with great conversation and a meal well prepared, something that you spent time crafting so that everybody gets to enjoy like really good food, not just fast food or anything like that. It has to be the combination of great people, good conversation, and wonderful food and wine. To me, that could be fulfillment. Work, I think it's a bit drier, I think, because fulfillment is more getting all those projects done at each stage, and it's done, and waiting for the results. And I think a bigger fulfillment is when you actually achieve the project. And the project I'm working on right now is a capital campaign for a food and meal program, where this organization was living in leased basements and rented church basements for the last 42 years. And they've never had their own home. And food and hunger is increased. People experiencing food scarcity is increasing every day. And to me, the fulfillment of that project would be when that building is built and more people can actually have a communal meal together and have supports that are really important to them to help them live in the inner city of Winnipeg. So that's a different kind of fulfillment, but I think it's a higher level of fulfillment. It's to me would be more of a community fulfillment, if I could put it in a category. So that's sort of another thing. I don't know what it would taste like apart from the good food, which
Yeah. Well,
so
you've struck on a number of topics that really resonate with me, actually, because in my first career, it was commercial hospitality management. So I used to run five-star hotels and conference centers, Michelin star restaurants, that sort of thing. So like you, I love great food and wine, good company. And also this thing about it's appreciating what's gone into making it happen that you see in front of you on the plate. And I'm not sure whether this is fulfillment. We might be steering off course a little bit here, actually, but I get really captivated and thrilled simply by watching, for instance, a talented sommelier take the cap off the wine bottle, remove the cork gracefully without a noise, just doing things perfectly, and then pouring it evenly for everybody. And I just love watching people who are really good at what they do. But that's not, I don't think that is fulfillment. That's something a little bit different.
well, it maybe is excellence. I mean, I have to admit that I like to see how things are done right. So when things are done right, it is a sense of fulfillment. If you do things right, it is a sense of fulfillment in a way. So I would say that yeah, that you could probably use that as an example. I think there's a million examples. I don't have any grandchildren, and I have a son, but they've decided not to have children. Well, actually, they've tried, but so they're not successful. They have cats, so I have grandcats. That does not give me a sense of fulfillment. But if they had a grandchild, I would think that would be a wonderful sense of fulfillment for me. That's not going to happen. But so what I do is to get that fulfillment is to enjoy everybody else's grandkids. And that is, you can actually enjoy that just as much.
Yeah, you can. And in fact, I had a conversation with somebody not too long ago, and she shared with me that I think this is right, her grandmother was not her real grandmother. It was like an adopted grandmother. And she was explaining how much she loved this lady and how it was, just as good as a real grandmother. And we were talking about what a brilliant concept that could be. Can you imagine somebody of grandma age who hasn't got grandchildren but would like them, and then somebody with young children who would like their children to have a grandma but they haven't? What a brilliant idea to have that scheme put in place. So think on that.
Well, I think there actually are programs called Adopt a Grandma or something like that. But yeah, no, I do. I really enjoy young people, and even when my son was young, I mean, every age that he was the most wonderful age of a person, and yeah. So I mean, that's one way to when you don't have a sense of fulfillment for something that you want a sense of fulfillment is to actually have a proxy in a way.
Yeah. And so the children bit you've touched on. So, and what you were saying there about his age was the best age. My kids are all grown up, but they're just brilliant people. And it is very fulfilling to see them as beautiful people, just as much as when they were children. And yeah, I've got a grandson who's 4. And then Lucy, their mum, so his mum, had twin girls in December. So, so she's got her hands full at the moment.
Oh, but that's wonderful. And I think you're right, because I have to say that my son, that is a sense of fulfillment to see how wonderful he's turned out. He's actually retired, which is amazing considering he's got early retirement, and I'm still working, but I work because I love to work, and that's a sense of fulfillment for me.
Yeah.
So I have to clear that one up. But he fulfills me. He's the most wonderful person to be around. He's hilarious. He's funny. He doesn't, if I'm a bit edgy about something, he's always got a zinger or something that's really funny to pull me out of it. Yeah, I really do enjoy him, and I'm really proud of him. So I guess that's family fulfillment there on that level.
Yeah. And now I'm going to ask you about the gardening bit, because I've got a thought that I'd just like to get your view on, because so this year I've got a small area at the back of the garden that was basically full of stones. So I sieved the earth and the stones and got rid of a lot of the stones and put compost in, and I've planted some vegetable seeds. So I've had a look, and I'm not sure that very many of them are coming up. But already I'm thinking about whether they come up or not. Next year, I'm going to do exactly the same exercise, and over time, it is going to work. And so I guess the point that I'm coming to is that if we have a different frame or a different perspective of what we're looking at, it actually determines the sense of fulfillment that we choose to have to a certain extent. Because I could take the view nothing's growing or not very much is growing. If it's 20% of what I planted is grown, is that a failure? But actually, I feel that's pretty good, because there was nothing there before at all. And it'll give me the chance to understand what I need to do differently next year. So what's this thing around the different perspective that you have on the same thing, which means that one person could be having a sense of fulfillment, whereas the other could be experiencing a sense of failure?
Well, I'll use my garden as an example. I've planted things that really are in the wrong spot, and they don't really do so well. And I have a bunny that bounces into my yard and wants to nibble on some of the younger plants. So that's not very fulfilling. So I've actually moved things around to a different spot because maybe that wasn't the right spot, and I've actually seen it flourish. I've dug things up. I've still got some stuff to do. The yard in this house that we bought was really neglected for like 10 years. So the ground was leached. So it's taken me a couple of years well, 1 year at least, to really revigorate the yard and make it look like what I want it to look like. So maybe that your garden, for example, is maybe not totally fulfilling, but maybe it's telling you that you have to move it or you have to do something else, and that fulfillment will come. It's not, to me, it's not immediate gratification. It's patience, and it's probably, patience and the willingness to let things happen at the rate that it's supposed to happen sometimes.
Yeah, I think we're homing in on something here, because what you've just described there around, moving stuff around, the fulfillment is actually in the whole experience, not just the end result. I think that's the difference. So, it's not just about, oh, it blossomed, or, oh, the vegetables grew. It's about what the experience was on the way to that, as much as the end result. Okay, so let's have another question. So let's go a little bit on the downside and see where we go. So where have you noticed a lack of fulfillment?
Boy, do I have to admit this? Well, okay. Lack of fulfillment. Well, I guess this is going to be pretty personal. I've been divorced, so there was
Okay.
a lack of fulfillment there. And so part of it, I think, had to do with expectations. So if you have an expectation for something and it doesn't turn out that way, then there is no fulfillment.
Yeah.
But if you have expectations and they work out, then there's fulfillment. So that's sort of how I view that. So on the downside, any other? Sure, I've had lots probably. That's where I've learned everything, is when things aren't fulfilled. I think that probably a work project that didn't quite meet its goal is an example, although I don't want to use work all the time. I want to think of some personal things. Yeah, I remember one time well, it's kind of interesting. It was sort of a not fulfilled, but fulfilled, if that can be the case. I ran the marathon one year,
Wow.
and actually, I'd only planned to run the half marathon, but I felt so wonderful at the halfway point. I continued on, and it probably took me about 5 hours to finish that marathon because I did not train for a full marathon. I trained for a half. So in a way, it wasn't fulfilling. I fulfilled the half marathon, but I pushed myself onto a whole different plane and did not complete the full marathon in the way I wanted to. But what an experience. I still talk about it, so it's got to be okay. That's sort of an example. That is just more sort of physical. I think physical fitness is always a struggle and fulfillment for me. You know, you plan to sort of lose some weight and you do it, and then boink, it's back on again. Or you're going to walk every day, and maybe you only walk 3 times during that week. Yeah, but you're still, as long as you keep moving on the trajectory of doing something and being physically active and being careful at times with what you eat and drink and be merry about, then I think maybe at some point you might feel fulfilled in a little way. But I don't think for physical health I think is always a struggle to feel fulfilled about for people.
Yeah. So there's two things that have popped into my mind listening to what you've just said. One is work related. So I had a job where I used to get into the office for just before 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would probably leave at around about 7 o'clock in the evening. And then it was a 1 hour train journey, and then have to get home, which was another 15 minutes, maybe something like that. And I remember, well, I think COVID actually brought this into stark relief, although it was a number of years previous. During COVID, I just suddenly appreciated my time a lot more than I had previously. And to think of, spending that much time commuting every day, and multiplied by the number of days in a week, number of days in a month, number of days in a year, it's like crazy. Why would you do that? And I realized in retrospect that I wasn't really fulfilled in that role, and that was probably part of it. It felt very much like on the treadmill kind of thing. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that has come to mind, you mentioning the marathon, the lady that does the bookkeeping for my business, she runs marathons. And I remember when I discovered this, it was like such a shock because she's quite slight, a quiet person, not athletic looking. And she just mentioned, oh, I run marathons. So, what do you mean run marathons? With an S? And she's now run, I think it's more than 250 marathons.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the reason this relates to fulfillment is because she doesn't come across as fulfilled at all. You know, it's just what she does. And here's a strange conversation that the two of us had. I said, I'm just amazed at how you can do that. And I am. It's just incredible. And she said, well, I don't know what all the fuss is about, because I just start running and then 4 hours later I stop. So that's all there is to it. And then she said to me, but Alan, you've written books. And I was like, yeah, but I just, write down what I've done at work, and then it's put into a book, and that's it. So both of us were actually not particularly fulfilled by something that the other person was extremely impressed by. And that's, what's that all about?
That's interesting because sometimes what other people do, you think that would really fulfill me if I could do that.
Yeah.
It's almost like a fulfillment goal. And yeah, I have a lot of those that I really admire that other people can do, and I wish I could do that. But I don't know if I take it, I just say, I'm glad I don't know if I actually take it up as I have to do it, because it's such a personal thing, but it's more like I wish I could do that, so, I would say I really admire people who can write books. Wish I could do that. I write reports. I do plans. They might be, the longest might be about 100 pages, but, to put something in a coherent package and sell a book is, to me, awesome. I wish I could do that. And, maybe it's because I think that people who write books have a clear idea of what they're trying to say. And I find that I'm interested in all sorts of things, and to hone in on one project would probably take a lot of my time. And I don't know if I would have that kind of time because I'm involved in so many things. So that's food for thought. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah. And here's a suggestion then. Just now we were talking about it's not the plant blooming that gives the fulfillment. It's the whole experience of you moved it 3 times over the last 4 years, and this time it's worked. So, and I'm thinking about writing books. For me, the end result is not the fulfillment, actually. It's having gone through that process, like you just said, of envisioning what you want the end product to look like, then breaking it down into its stages, then considering the reader, then putting the words together, then the referencing so that it is all really tight and packaged. So it's actually the whole experience that is the fulfillment, not the end result. Having said that, I spoke to somebody, hopefully that I'm going to be working with, who they run a really fast growing preschool nursery business. And so I sent this lady a couple of the books that I've written, and I just asked her what she thought of them. And I don't think she was being polite. Obviously, she was being being a little bit polite. But she said, Alan, they are just such brilliant books. I've taken so much from them. And I have to admit, I felt my heart grow a bit. It was like, that's why I've written these books, is so that people can be encouraged to do something different and better in their organization because they've read it. But again, it's not the book, it's what they're doing with it that gives a sense of fulfillment. So it's when I showed you the card, I hadn't really appreciated all of the nuances actually that we're just starting to explore now. Let's try another question. So in the Values Jam cards, there's an opportunity to create your own question. So I'd like to invite you to do this now. So ask your question about fulfillment. starting with who, what, where, when, why, or how. And the question can either be to yourself or to me, or both of us in turn.
Great. I have a question that is to you. And it is, when did you get your first sense of fulfillment?
Great question. Okay, it might not be the first, actually. If I can, I'm going to bend the question a little bit, because it's the one that I felt most fulfilled over, but it wasn't necessarily the first. I think that, okay, I should answer your question, shouldn't I? I think it was when I scored. So I've been a soccer fan, football here, soccer there, since I was a kid. And when I was 10, there was a football player, an Irish player called George Best, who was recognized as kind of, just about the best player in the world. And my mum bought me a pair of football boots with his signature on the side. And I was I was absolutely convinced that I could run faster when I had these boots on. And the first time that I wore them, I scored a goal. And that was the first feeling of fulfillment. I just felt so thrilled. Probably, when we were going back earlier and talking about how it was a more peaceful, content thing, this wasn't actually, but it was fulfilled, actually. It was fulfilled at the same time. But then let me just share the other one with you. I then went through school, and I did reasonably well at school. So I didn't get a great sense of fulfillment about getting the grades and all the rest of it, because it was just like, well, that's what happens. Then I failed my driving test twice. And that was the first time that I had experienced failure. Up until then, everything that I'd done, I was on the football team at school and in the athletics team and did okay at grades and stuff like that. So this was a real shock. And then the third time that I took my test, I passed. And I said to the guy, I said, I want to hug you. And I know that's probably not the right thing to do. And just sat there in the car instead. But that was a great feeling of fulfillment as well. But again, I'm questioning actually what the fulfillment was, because I think the deeper sense was of relief, because here was this young man who was used to being successful, who had been a failure in this instance, not once, but twice. And it would have been unbearable to have been a failure again. So I don't even know whether that was fulfillment now. You've got me thinking about it. What about yours? When was your earliest sense of fulfillment?
Well, it's interesting because both of yours, even before you answered, I thought, actually, as you were answering it, even before you mentioned your sports, I actually thought of this two very similar ones. But I'll start with the latter. I failed my first driving test too. So I have sympathy, but I remember everything that I did wrong. It's like embedded in my head, because they tell you afterwards that you came too close to the car, and whatever it did, or something. And of course, I'm a cyclist, so that is like embedded in my brain. But I have to go back to, but passing is a sense of fulfillment. Just getting through that test when you're young, and it's scary driving. That was good. The other was when I was in probably elementary, probably grade 7, I would say, probably grade 7 in Canada. And every year we have a field day, and we had a very small school, but we all had to participate. And some of the girls at that time, they wouldn't participate. And I thought, I knew I wasn't great at many things, but I'd love to be active. So I participated in absolutely everything. I did, I either came first, second, or third in all these sports. And I think my philosophy was really embedded there when I said, at least I tried. And, you know, I've done that with every single sport. I can play almost every sport, not brilliantly, but at least I tried. But now as a life, you know, as an adult, I can at least enjoy golf. I can enjoy running, walking, cycling, all those things that I tried when I was younger. So I guess maybe the moral of the story is, do not be afraid to at least try, so that, you know, your sense of fulfillment later in life, you can enjoy all these other activities and sports. People who take it up late in life, I think they must regret not trying, you
Yeah.
know. So I think that gives you a lot of confidence too, and that it may help you to appreciate a more fulfilling life, because you'll be exposed to a more variety of things and experiences. And I think it helps with your openness. So I think that was a pivotal experience for me. I haven't remembered that for a long, long time, but it strikes me as I remember doing high jumping, you name it. I was doing it all, even when I didn't know what I was doing, but I tried.
And, you know, so there's a few things here. So first, you know, you said you haven't thought about that for a long time. This is one of the kind of spooky things that happens with Values Jam conversations. Very, very frequently, people say, that's crossed my mind for the first time for decades, or, you know, many years or whatever. So I ended up speaking to a psychologist in New Zealand, and what he said was that because values conversations are deep, it might be that previously lapsed neural pathways are being re-sparked. And that's what's causing a memory to come to the surface, whereas previously it was kind of like hidden. So as a result of that, we're now starting to speak to people in the area of Alzheimer's and dementia, because imagine in a senior living care setting, people being able to have a conversation like this with dignity with either a fellow resident or a visitor or a caregiver, instead of, you know, quite trite games of bingo or, you know, so things like that. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention. And then you've reminded me of another story from that time. So I was chosen to be I think it was called head boy at the primary school. So 10 years old, right? And I remember this conversation so clearly. The headmaster said, you know, he said, you're good at what you do, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. That's why we'd like you to be. And then he said, and for the girl, we've chosen this girl. And he said, what do you think? And now the girl that he had chosen was extremely bright. She used to come top in the class at all the subjects all the time, but she didn't do sport much at all. And there was a girl that I had a bit of an eye on at who was a bit more sporty, not quite as good academically. But I said to him, do you think that people might find it more interesting to have a girl that's more of an all-rounder than just an academic as the head girl, because it might inspire them in sport as much as it does for the academic side? And and he just said, oh, I'd never really considered her, but let me give it some thought. And actually he chose her.
Oh, good.
And I just remember thinking, I feel pretty good about that, because, you know, she would not have had the spotlight. And why should she not? Just because she wasn't the brightest girl in the class, kind of thing. So you just reminded me of that. So thank you. That's a fond memory. And I just wanted to finish off. So this was, I remember my mum coming to collect me from school, and we were chatting, and I remember plucking up the courage to say to her, Mum, you see that girl over there? That's my girlfriend. And my mum said, oh, great, let's go over and say hello. And I said, no, you can't, because she doesn't know.
Yeah, well, we actually have a lot of those that we don't tell them that that you like them. Oh, that's cute.
And the final thing that in response to what you were saying just now, Pam, about you were talking again about how it was the experience that gave the sense of, when you were talking about the sport, right? You said you tried. You might not have won or been the best or all the rest of it, but actually it wasn't the result that gave the fulfillment. It was the participation and the experience. So that keeps coming back to me in this conversation about how fulfillment is the longer thing rather than the instant moment.
Mm-hmm.
So let's time has flown, you know, it's like 50 minutes since we started to chat, and I'm going to ask the final question now. It is, what are you encouraged to do differently about fulfillment as a result of our conversation today?
Well, that's actually a tough question, because what comes to mind immediately is to be more focused on the areas that give me the most fulfillment or that I want. I think maybe I'm doing several things that really I'm doing them, but I'm not, my heart is, that's not where I want to be in my sense of fulfillment. And I think as you age, you kind of define areas that are more important to you than others. And so maybe I need to get a bit of the clutter out of my my life. I think that's probably what I will probably do, is get some of the things that aren't really that fulfilling. Now, having said that, there are things that are unfulfilling that you have to do.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether it's clearing away stuff that you've had for far too long, maybe that it will be fulfilling to get rid of that stuff. But I think maybe focusing more on what gives me more happiness, more fulfillment, more self-satisfaction with both my life, but also with the projects I do, I suppose. Focus on those that I'm really interested in.
So one of the objectives when we designed this game was to have a tangible impact as a result of the conversation. What we didn't want to happen was that people had an enjoyable conversation, but then nothing came of it. So what you've just described is a kind of quite general approach to what you're going to do differently. Could I ask you to identify something a bit more concrete? So there's a couple of things that you mentioned. One was doing more in certain areas, and the other, I think I heard, was to throw some stuff out. So, you know, could you just move it forward a bit in terms of being able to say, well, actually, as my first step, what I'm going to do is this.
Okay, actually, as my first step, I don't know. I think I'm actually, my first step is going to make a plan, probably. It's going to brainstorm a list of things that are fulfilling and unfulfilling, and then create a priority list of what I'm getting, what I'm not going to do, I suppose. I'd probably make a list. How is that? Will that work?
That's very tangible. When have you got time to be able to do that?
Oh man, I could do it later this afternoon. How's that?
Okay, that's a result. And mine, I think this conversation has made me realize how, unless we focus on fulfillment, maybe it passes us by and we don't recognize it. And so tonight, before I go to sleep, I'm going to think about all of the great things that have happened today that I have gained a sense of fulfillment from, just so that they're captured rather than lost when the eyes close and I go to sleep and then it's another day.
Sounds like a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
That's a good project.
So Pam, thank you so much for our Values Jam today. You're now an official Values Jammer.
You know, this was fun, and I can hardly wait to get my cards, because I'm going to do some of this here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think was it last week or the week before?
I think it was last week. Last week I ordered them. Yeah. So I will get them
They're sent from New Mexico, so it's a different country, but hopefully they'll get there a bit quicker than if they had been sent from here.
Yeah, I look forward to getting them. But thank you. This was a fun thing to do and actually very interesting. It's made me think about a lot of things, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I've loved it. So thank you so much. Cheers.